A year ago, I made this video right here, and it was all about gain staging and the simple formula that I used to ensure that every track was hitting at a certain level so that I wouldn't clip my plugins and I would have the right level going into my fader, which would then feed the next place that I send that signal to, ultimately leading up to the mix bus, and I would have sufficient, more than sufficient headroom to be able to adequately apply processing there. But I've since, a year later, have updated my methodology for gain staging. And if you've been challenged by all the videos on the internet about gain staging and how to set the proper levels, I think that this video right here and the method that I've utilized over the past year or so is going to be a game changer for you. So let's discuss the gain staging method that I used in this previous video from a year ago. What I did was I used this plugin called the normalizer. I set a ceiling of -18. I normalized every track in the session, but I would set this kind of standard level of -18. Every track got this plugin as the first plugin on the insert, and that allowed me to just hear everything and then start to mix. There was one comment making me realize I don't think I clarified something enough. So watch the video here real quick, what I was talking about, and I'll explain afterward. So after I normalize, I'll add, let's say, an EQ. And I'm on the kick track here, and I don't know, let's play it and I'll boost up what I feel is necessary. And then I'll bypass and engage to make sure that I'm not being fooled by the level increase from the EQ. Or if you press this A here in the Pro Q3, it's auto gain and it compensates for the level increase or the level decrease when EQing. So the point that I think that was most unclear is after I set this normalization level at -18, I then talked about, then I can do EQ moves and boost where I need to boost. And then I would set this kind of auto gain feature on the EQ or whatever processing so that I'm not fooled by any level jump, making me think that what I did sounds better. So this would allow me to hear what I did and just hear the effect versus the volume boost. But that would leave us still at relatively around that -18 mark. And I think the confusion was that, okay, so you gain stage initially at -18, and then you add the processing, and then you do something that keeps it at that -18. How do you mix? How do you compare volume and the levels of instruments to another and get a good balance for a mix? So I think at the time, a year ago, what I was doing is I was setting everything to -18, and I would take the anchor instrument element in the mix. Once I get the level of, let's say, the kick drum locked in and I add compression, EQ, saturation, I still try to keep it at that -18. And then everything else gets balanced around that -18 level, which would generally mean that all the other instruments would come down in level because that kick drum is going to be the loudest element in the mix for the most part. What's going to happen is when all of those signals meet at the buses or the mix bus, you're going to get a very low level signal, especially if we're talking about peaking at -18 and not -18 RMS average level. So when they all meet at the mix bus, it's like I'm gonna have to boost this signal a lot. And I think after that video, I came across some information I've stuck with for the past year, and it has been such a good tool for me to give me that basic foundation before I even apply processing. It's the same idea when it comes to normalization. Let me just show you what it is. So I think a lot of mixing engineers might know this book, and in it, Bobby Owsinski talks about setting different instruments at certain levels. For example, he says, set the kick at -5, set the snare at -5, hi-hat -20, bass -10, vocal -10, guitars -20. I took this concept and I applied it to how I mix in my genre and where I felt things sounded best. And for me, I still used normalization. I still use a plugin. The plugin I use is the Waves L1 Simple Limiter plugin. How I use it, it has a threshold and an output setting. I take the threshold. Let's say the kick is hitting at -9. That's how the producer tracked out the kick drum. I like the kick hitting at -6. With the anchor element of my mix being -6, I will take the threshold of that limiter, and this is how I gain stage. So if the kick is hitting at -9, I'm going to set the threshold at -9. If the kick is hitting at -8.5, I'm setting the threshold at -8.5. Essentially, I'm driving 8.5 or 9, whatever it is, decibels of gain into the limiter, into the output section, so to speak. I'm boosting it up by that much. And the output, I'm setting at -6. So here I'm now decreasing the output, and that's going to give me a kick that hits at -6. So I'm just using these two parameters in the limiter to give me a kick that's hitting and peaking at -6. Can you go into your DAW and use the normalization function and do this? Yes, absolutely. Why do I use an L1 limiter, which kind of seems a little bit more complicated, right? Because sometimes it prints on the actual file. If you, like I think in Logic, it prints on the file. So if you normalize in Logic, it will actually change the level of the actual file of the kick drum. So I want to keep the files clean as they were sent to me, but I also like to potentially do some limiting on a certain instrument. Yeah, I want the kick drum to peak at -6, and I'm using the limiter here to gain stage to get me there. Maybe I want to do a couple decibels of limiting on the kick drum to reduce the transient of the kick. So now I'm kind of shaping the sound while gain staging as well. And another reason is because I'm usually working in different DAWs. I'm creating the beat in Maschine, and Maschine doesn't have, to my knowledge, any way to normalize other than normalizing it to 0. So if I want to have my kick hitting at -6, then I got to use a third-party plugin to be able to get me there. In Pro Tools, it's very, very simple. Audio Suite, normalize, and you can set exactly where you want your instrument to hit. But like I said, having that capability to do some limiting if I think it's necessary. Sometimes, you know, there's an instrument that's very dynamic, so there might be a strong peak, and I might want to control that from the beginning. So I'll shave off some of the transient, and I'm doing that with the limiter. So I'm utilizing it in a couple different ways, not all the time, but that's why it's there for me. But you can simply use any normalization option in your DAW and do the same exact thing. So the way that I've updated this method is that I'm obviously employing the normalization tactic in the same way I'm setting my levels using normalization. Right now, it's worked for me in the past year or so consistently. Every single mix, I've just nailed down this formula, and I'm going to share it with you. Kick hitting at -6 all the time. Snare drum generally is hitting at -10, a little bit lower than the kick, but it depends on the snare. Sometimes if the snare has a lot of RMS energy and it doesn't have a strong transient, then I might have to lower it even more because it's just perceivably very loud. Hi-hats, set them at -18, all of them. Set the hi-hats, the crashes, the open hats, all percussion, -18. I think he said in this book here, percussion at -25, but I just feel like the hi-hats and any of that top end energy needs to be a little bit higher depending on the genre. Bass, 808, depends on how much RMS energy is in that 808 and how much low end is there, but I'm usually setting my bass somewhere between -10, -12, rarely -15, but usually about 4 to 6 dB lower than the kick. All instrumentation, piano, sample, strings, I automatically set them to -18. And then at like the drum bus stage, the drum and bass bus stage where the drums combine with the bass, either I'm setting a limiter or I'm setting a clipper. And what I'm just trying to do is shave off any of that energy that's adding more level. You know, when the hi-hat combines with the kick drum, I want to shave that off, and I want to make sure that everything is still hitting -6 at the drum bus, that we're not peaking above -6. Drum and bass, same thing. If I add the bass, I want to make sure that the end result at that drum and bass is -6. At the mix bus, before I add any kind of mix bus processing, I'm hitting the mix bus at -6. That's where it's going into all of my mix bus processing at that level. So now it's just about controlling the level throughout the entire mix and making sure that my anchor element, the low end or the kick drum, is always hitting at that level. So now when I bring the vocals in, I know I'm going to have enough headroom. Headroom is never really an issue for me at all. With the last video, setting everything at -18, I think we were leaving a little bit too much headroom, but I just wanted to update that video, share with you how I'm now applying my gain staging method, what I'm doing. And really the only difference is I'm just not setting everything to this standard level. Everything now, depending upon the instrument, has its own place in regard to level and gain staging, so that when I do all of that, I think the mix is pretty much done in regards to like balance. I don't set a limiter or some kind of automated means at the end of my chain to ensure that it's hitting, you know, -18 still. Like the hi-hat, we start at -18 and we make sure that it hits at -18 after all the processing, but I still think it sounds good there. So I'm not having my hi-hat hit like -6 at the end of all of my processing. Hope that makes sense. So if you guys got any questions, concerns in regard to what I'm discussing here, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll be glad to address it. And if you want more context of what I was discussing in that previous video from a year ago, go ahead and click on that video box that pops up here, watch it, and let me know what you think. Until the next video, God bless you.